Engineers, scientists, trained and skilled labor, automated processing system, electronic data storage, and fast transportation all form the basis for a complex society. Should the infrastructure that support this collapse, we cannot recover on our own. This is why higher education is vital for America's interest. Universities and trade schools are a source of educated labor and serve as data repositories. In a temporary suspension of infrastructure services, cities with access to universities can fare better than those without them. Should infrastructure not function for extended periods of time, or if neighborhoods and neighboring cities and regions collapse or experience significant decline, our cities will decline no matter what, due to the high degree of interconnectedness between them. Our cities are simply dependent on too much to be able to function on their own, even with access to educational institutions or skilled labor. Take electric power, for instance, everything I use in the studio. Much of our electricity comes from coal and other fossil fuels. That coal is not mined locally but throughout the United States. Without a stable supply of coal and oil, our infrastructure cannot be sustained. The same is true if coal prices experience sudden unexpected volatility. Our reliance on coal has the added effect of releasing mercury, which pollutes soil and water and damages fish stocks. This further decreases our city's ability to revert to local self-sufficiency should the need arise. What is true for coal is also true for oil, on which our cars depend. It's imported, subject to price volatility, and it releases toxic compounds and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which intensify global warming and reduces local self-sufficiency even further. Many people believe that further technological improvements will correct environmental problems, reduce dependence on imports, or enable local communities to be more self-sufficient. Underlying this expression of faith is the implicit assumption that from tomorrow onwards, technology will function primarily to solve existing problems and will cease to create new ones. Solar or wind power, for example, are not cost-effective, adversely affecting the environment during their production upon their disposal, and wind turbines create noise and shadow pollution. While traditional fossil fuels have a base load capacity, many renewables do not. That is to say, while you can't have a bag of coal or a barrel of oil, you can't equally have a bag of sun rays or a barrel of wind. New technology, while solving old problems, does create new challenges. Diamond, on the other hand, states that all of our current problems are the unintended consequences of our existing technology. This overgeneralization is simply not true. Our current problems are the consequence of our preference for short-term gain over long-term sustainability, our use of high future discount rates, and the profit incentive mechanism of corporations, and the externalization of costs such as pollution in an effort to satisfy shareholders. Technology is a tool. How it's used is up to us. Part of the problem is that our economy is dependent on the forces of corporate motivation, which are not centered on social interest but on accumulating profit. That's not to say that that's bad, it's just the way they're structured may not be working currently to address the problems we're facing for the future. From experience, we know that partly irrational failures to try to solve perceived problems often arise from clashes between short-term and long-term motives of the same individual. While a corporation may want to be environmentally responsible, it's ultimately responsible to its shareholders, which come first. We also need to keep in mind that corporations are not the only responsible agent for current social and environmental issues. We as consumers are as well. We observe that clashes of interest involving rational behavior are also prone to arise when the principal consumer has no long-term stake in preserving the resources, but society as a whole does. A strategically optimal choice for an individual consumer is to consume as much as possible in order to increase his or her utility. The expectation is that any negative consequences, such as pollution, will be spread out enough throughout society as to not be noticed or to not be significant enough to cause an outcry. The problem is that as society grows in size and complexity, the more individuals pursue this strategic option, the higher the marginal effect of pollution becomes. The large population of our cities leads to equally large environmental impacts. The city is further affected by the actions of other cities and nations that choose current consumption and growth over long-term sustainability. Let's take a look at wood consumption in this light. From the Norse culture, we learned that Vikings' iron extraction and tool production, and even the repair of iron tools, consumed enormous quantities of wood, which became a limiting factor in the history of Viking Greenland, where trees were in short supply. Modern tools and technology use vast quantities of water, oil, wood, and electricity, itself derived from coal and natural gas. Our communities use also wood products in the form of napkins, paper, cardboard, furniture, and other items. Our universities with thousands of students use millions of sheets of paper every year. So do businesses. One way to mitigate the effect of this demand is to use recycled products, but there is only so much that can be recycled. Wood is also used in the construction of homes. From the Norse, we see that almost all Greenland buildings were constructed mostly of turf. When I'm speaking of the Greenland Norse, I'm talking about very early, in the beginning of the first millennium. For Vikings, turf was necessary for pastures. Its destruction for habitat construction decreased food production. In the U.S., wood is used for homes, and thus is not available for other uses. Whether it's obtained locally or imported from other regions, it contributes to deforestation. Whether deforesting our trees here or exporting that deforestation to other nations, this contributes to flood, soil erosion, pollution, and desertification throughout the world. On Easter Island, for example, we see that the immediate consequences of massive deforestation for the islanders were losses of raw materials, losses of wild-caught food, and decreased crop yields. It's in our nation's best interest to discontinue consuming so much wood for so many purposes. However, curtailing wood use for homes is not feasible. Diamond notes that Norse society's structure created a conflict between short-term interests of those in power and the long-term interest of the society as a whole.